Assemblyman, the 20th Legislative District, you talked about transportation. How else are we going to benefit from some of the things the governor's signing this week?
Well, we're going to benefit quite a bit. We're going to have increased property tax relief, as we've mentioned as well. We'll have increased accountability in government through the controller bill. In addition, we'll have new opportunities in the budget for those citizens in Elizabeth, for example, who depend more for autism. For Medicare, Medicaid type of reimbursements. There's more money to be found for the types of things that individuals truly need. And as a result, I think this is a positive time for the city of Elizabeth in terms of what Trenton is providing. And I think it's a positive move for the future.
When you mentioned autism, there was a story in the Star Ledger that said in New Jersey, 1 out of every 94 kids is born with autism, and that's a very high rate compared to the rest of the country, where it's much higher rate. And that gets criticized because sometimes that shows up as a Christmas tree item, so-called, it's in the paper. But these were important dollars for people who can't get services for their children.
Sure, I fought for money for COSAC, which is one of the leading autism organizations in the state, and make no bones about it. 1 in 94 kids have seem to have autism in the state, and you can hear about the reasons why. It is the most in the country here in New Jersey. Folks have different reasons why. I mean, certainly one of the issues is the fact that the lack of environmental standards under this administration, under the Bush administration, and the winds that come across New Jersey as they head out to the ocean clearly raise some concerns as to whether or not we're getting all the protections we deserve from the federal government. But as you know, and as anyone who has had to deal with an autistic child who's been diagnosed in that manner knows, your life changes completely. You have different concerns, and you have other children to deal with, and you have marital responsibilities. And what happens is when you have an autistic child, special needs become more considerate. The idea of how you're going to handle this with your family, the idea of how you're going to educate the child as they grow to be an adult. And for so many, almost a lost population now, those adults who are aging out of the system yet are still developmentally disabled or have autism or these sort of things are an ongoing situation in New Jersey, where we have many parents who wonder, whether in their 60s and the 70s, the baby boomer generation, who have grown up and taken care of a disabled child, wonder what's going to happen to that person when they go. It's a frightening concept, and it's one that this new money for autism will hopefully begin the opportunity to handle and to work with in the future. Some money for research and some for care that we need to deal with as a society, because when someone's behind, we're all behind.
Yeah, my parents dealt with that issue back in the 60s and 70s, and my brother passed away, but it still was an issue they had to deal with on a child that was ill. And it's very difficult, and I think you've enunciated very clearly. The governor's proposed budget addresses some tough issues that our state faces today. Last year, I even think you would agree, the budget end process was a debacle in this state.
Sure was.
Do you envision that happening again, or are there, on the committees you serve on the budget committee, correct?
I do, yes.
Does this get done earlier this year? Is there a printed budget that people can look at and debate and talk about before we get into the middle of the night on July 4th weekend?
Thankfully, I believe this time it will be a little better. And without rehashing the past, the fact is that we go down to this, the constitutional mandate in this state is that you have a budget by the close of June 30th each year. As you know, last year we didn't do that. I do have the pleasure and the honor of being on both the budget and the appropriations committees in the Assembly. So the result is that what happens is as we work on the budget, we need to change the process. So what we've done is, as you've mentioned, we've expedited it and come up front earlier. What I'm really pleased about is that at the end of the budget process, which is now scheduled for June the 12th, we will actually have 2 public hearings. What happens in the budget process now is you have 3 public hearings to begin with when the governor first introduces his budget, so you can solicit public comment on the issues that are concerns out there for the public. Then you go into departmental hearings. We look at, for example, the Department of Corrections or the Department of Human Services and say, are you really spending your dollars right? And then we formulate the final budget, which we present as the legislature to the governor. What's positive in this respect...
Does the governor have veto power of the budget in New Jersey?
Yes, he does. He not only can veto the entire budget if he chooses to, but he has line item veto power as well. So he can pick things and just redline them, as they say. The benefit here is that we'll have a public hearing process at the end. So if we've missed items, which happens on occasion, we'll hear from those advocates for those issues and be able to maybe make some tweaks and adjustments before we finalize the budget. I'm very excited about it. This is a budget that the governor introduced that has no new taxes for the first time since I've been on the budget committee since 2002. So it's a positive step that really is, instead of looking at revenues, is really looking at priorities. And the governor's priorities have been pretty clear. He's into autism. He's into property tax relief. He's made it clear we need some more dollars for transportation. I share his priorities to some extent. The difficulty is there's never enough money to help everybody.
It's the first time in years he's actually increasing municipal aid, and maybe you can talk about that as well. I mean, as the mayors of this state, we've never, in I think 15 years since Jim Florio was the governor, has there been a proposal to increase municipal aid. Now, we got the hotel tax on the McGreevy and a few other things that increase revenue to cities, but this is an out-and-out increase in municipal aid.
It is, and while it's only a couple percent, you'd certainly like it to be more. I think what it does is it makes a commitment that now we can finally begin to look at the needs of our local municipalities for what it is. You can't endure the continued rising costs that you have, whether they're in some of the ones we mentioned in healthcare and energy. But reality is in salary and wage, which is a great deal of your budget, Mayor, as it is for every mayor throughout the state. When you're dealing with contractual increases of 3 and 4% and not receiving any aid, that falls back on the local property taxpayer. So the benefit here is that a couple percent helps offset some of those costs, and we'll continue to focus more on that in the years ahead.
Now, are all the budget meetings held in Trenton, Joe, or Assemblyman, or some of these are held throughout the state, correct?
Some of them are held throughout the state. We will have had a public hearing in Atlantic City before this and one in North Jersey.
Well, that's
as well.
a tough place to have a public hearing.
It's another sacrifice. But you know, the reality is what you do is you try and be geographical for folks so that they don't have to travel all the way to Trenton, which while it is the state capital, it's not the most convenient place in the world. But all the departmental hearings where we look at corrections or human services, as I mentioned before, those are held in Trenton. And hopefully we'll be in a place where we have an early budget adoption and one that's good for not only the state of New Jersey, but for each individual taxpayer as well.
Assemblyman, you played a critical role in the establishment of the Department of Children and Family Services, and you sponsored the legislation to create the department.
Oh, yeah.
After everything you've worked on, why focus on that? I mean, how important was it, especially with what was going on in the state at that time?
Well, frankly, it was a thrill to do that. I have the privilege of being the chair of the Human Services Committee, which means in the Assembly that the DYFS reforms and the Child Welfare Reform Plan fall under my committee. Whether it's here in Elizabeth, here in Union County, or throughout the state, we all know of situations where children need better services from the state to enhance their roles with their families, or quite frankly, just for their protection. By breaking out this department and making it separate, we were able to accomplish a couple things. We were able to revise the objectives of the Child Welfare Reform Plan. In other words, making sure that the intercession with kids that are in trouble, that they get in the right health care, that they have adoptive families if they can, that they get the proper school training that they need, that resource families are there for a child that's in trouble so that someone can step in and help right away. Also enhancing that department for the type of technology that they need. In this day and age, DYFS pretty much was still hand to mouth. So what we've been able to do is by creating a separate department, and it took a while to do so, but what we've been able to do is really focus in on the issues with children and families in the state, separate it out. The Human Services Department, which is what this department was a part of before, is the largest department in the state. At the time, it had over 26,000 employees, and that was simply too much. By breaking it out and highlighting the problem, we've been able to make some, as I'm sure some of the listeners have seen, some noted progress as has been advanced recently in the Ledger and some of the other newspapers that has shown some progress.